This video was made possible thanks to our friends over at class-central.com/Pakman. Click the link under this video to browse tens of thousands of college lectures from the world's top universities. Let's talk about telekinesis, also known as psychokinesis. It's the ability to influence physical matter supernaturally with the mind. Someone who claims to have telekinesis claims that they can move or physically manipulate objects without physically interacting with that object. So examples can include making an object levitate, transmuting an object into another object, supernaturally affecting someone's biology, such as healing someone with a disease, for example. Telekinesis can be thought of as a type of psychic power, but a distinction is sometimes made between a psychic and a telekinetic. Psychics are considered to be people who know things through supernatural means. Telekinetics are people who can physically move or change things. A person who is knowingly creating the illusion of manipulating objects but doesn't claim to have supernatural powers would call themselves a magician, for example, or an illusionist. In this case, it's more of a performance art. But someone who truly believes that they're able to move objects with their mind, or is trying to deceive their audience into believing as much, will assert that they're really telekinetic. In the famous Hindu myth called Mahabharata, written around 400 BC, one of the two major Sanskrit epics of ancient India, the story's plot centers around the character Shakuni and his manipulation of dice to influence a game in his favor. This might be the first instance of telekinesis known in fiction. Then, of course, there's Jesus, who might be the most famous telekinetic of all time, turning water into wine, curing people of blindness, feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, according to the New Testament, of course. There was the wizard Merlin from the legend of King Arthur in the 12th century, who through telekinetic powers traveled across the ocean in a glass house and built Stonehenge, according to the tale. Even though telekinesis has been a theme in fiction and mythology for centuries, it didn't really gain much popularity as something actually done in front of an audience until the 19th century. The term telekinesis was first coined by Russian writer Alexander Aksakov during his fascination with a British woman known as Madame d'Espérance, who performed seances through Europe, tricking people into believing that she could do things like talking to the dead, using her mind to move tables, making flowers appear out of thin air. Aksakov was a journalist and researcher of supernatural phenomena, and after spending time with d'Espérance, praised her, wrote about her as a real, honest telekinetic. D'Espérance was later proven to be a fraud, beginning in 1880 during a performance where an audience member actually caught her pretending to be a ghost. A few years later, during a performance where she claimed to dematerialize the lower half of her body, an audience member again caught her squeezing her legs through the back of her chair. D'Espérance, the first person described with the word telekinetic, is probably the most famous fraudulent telekinetic of the late 1800s. Another study subject of Alexander Aksakov was an Italian woman named Eusapia Palladino. Palladino put on shows making her audience believe she was able to talk to the dead and levitate objects. The British Society for Psychical Research caught Palladino on multiple occasions just using simple tricks to create the illusions she claimed were telekinetic phenomena. She used sleight of hand techniques. She used her foot to move furniture she claimed to be moving with her mind. She even tied long strands of hair on objects to make them appear to float in the air. World-renowned illusionist Harry Houdini wrote a book in 1920 called Miracle Mongers and Their Methods, and he exposed frauds like d'Espérance and Palladino. The book actually chronicled the history of fake telekinetics and gives detailed explanations of how they created these illusions. There's been widespread scientific consensus since the 1800s that telekinesis is pure pseudoscience. In 1988, the National Research Council in the US actually commissioned a panel to research this. They reviewed 130 years of past scientific research on telekinesis, and they said in their conclusion, quote, "Evaluation of a large body of the best available evidence simply does not support the contention that these phenomena exist." Around the same time, the US Army and the National Academy of Sciences formed a panel to study the evidence for telekinesis and to assess whether it might have military and intelligence applications. For example, they wanted to figure out, could individuals use telekinesis to remotely sabotage enemy weaponry? You can be sure that if there was any validity to telekinesis, the US military would do everything possible to discover and make use of it, but they had no such luck. The panel was completely unable to find any scientific evidence to support the existence of telekinesis. So ask yourself, what's more likely, that people have been convinced of telekinesis only through trickery and faulty experimental design, or that the fields of neuroscience and physics need to be completely reinvented to account for telekinesis? Through physics, we know how matter behaves and why. Caltech physicist Sean Carroll has written about telekinesis and has pointed out that all of the objects telekinetics claim to bend or levitate consist of atoms, and that any movement of these atoms would require telekinesis to use means other than the four known fundamental forces of nature. Those are the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravitation. Carroll said that if telekinesis uses a new, undiscovered fifth force of nature, simple math shows that it would need to be about 1/billionth the strength of gravity as to go undetected by all other prior physics research. And gravity is simply not strong enough to bend a spoon. Carroll says, quote, "And that's it. We are done. The deep lesson is that although science doesn't know everything, it's not anything goes either. There are well-defined regimes of physical phenomena where we do know how things work, full stop. The place to look for new and surprising phenomena is outside those regimes. You don't need to set up elaborate double-blind protocols to pass judgment on the abilities of purported psychics." British physicist John Taylor was originally a believer in telekinesis. He was inspired by the supposed telekinetic Uri Geller, who's famous for bending metal spoons, and Taylor spent 4 years conducting research on possible causes of telekinesis. By the end of his long, in-depth exploration, Taylor concluded there's no plausible physical mechanism for telekinesis. Taylor said that all of the supposed telekinesis he studied ended up having other naturalistic explanations, and that no actual telekinesis occurred under scientifically controlled conditions. Uri Geller, who I mentioned, is probably the most famous purported telekinetic of all time. He's been making TV appearances and performing for live audiences since the late 1960s, and his career has turned him into a multimillionaire. He's claimed to have telepathic and telekinetic powers given to him by aliens. His most well-known routine is to bend metal spoons, which he says he does with his mind, but Geller's spoon bending has been demonstrated time and time again by magicians to be completely possible through simple magic tricks and illusion. In the early 70s, Geller was successfully sued for fraud and was court-ordered to refund the ticket price to the man who sued him. Geller only agrees to bend spoons in certain situations. He was unable to bend any spoons when he appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson in 1973. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman has said that Geller was unable to perform the trick on demand when they met in person, and as of 2007, Geller has more or less admitted that he doesn't actually have supernatural powers. Science has long been eager to find real evidence of telekinesis, but telekinesis has always managed to come up short. From 1964 to 2015, there was even a legitimate $1 million prize offered by the James Randi Educational Foundation, which we've spoken about before, to anyone who could demonstrate telekinetic or other supernatural abilities, and no one was ever successful in collecting that $1 million. And still to this day, no scientists have been able to properly replicate claims about telekinesis in controlled lab conditions. Of course, it's true that scientific research has the ability to completely overturn what we think we know scientifically. It is possible that someday we'll be able to prove the existence of telekinesis, but tests must be conducted under the most stringent conditions to reverse a century of established science. People claiming telekinetic powers and people who believe in telekinesis need to understand why strict standards must be applied to experiments that examine the supposed phenomenon. It's because telekinesis would defy facts that are firmly settled in physics and neurobiology that we need those strict conditions. And until now, it's not something that telekinesis has been able to live up to, period. If you want to learn more about the scientific method and why certain types of claims require specific types of scientific evidence, click the link under this video and check out the great new course offered by the University of Edinburgh called Introduction to the Philosophy of Physical Sciences. It's one of thousands of courses you'll find at class-central.com/Pakman, whether it's political science, psychology, sociology, physics, business, comp sci, almost anything you can imagine. They have courses from MIT, Stanford, Berkeley, and tons of the courses are totally free. Get started watching college lectures on topics you love right now by clicking the link underneath this video.